Mic'd Up Podcast, hosted by Dr. Mike Miller and Kobe Duran of Central Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Texas, is a series of conversations about issues that matter. For people who have real questions and doubts, it covers topics of faith, theology, and philosophy in ways that are easy to understand. Ultimately, Mic'd Up is a podcast with a couple of guys having conversations about conversations you are having. Mic'd Up is produced by Al Lambert Jr. at Mic'd Up Studios in Jacksonville, Texas.
Hey, wait, I got to tell you what I had for lunch today.
Do you really have to?
I had charcuterie, which is a fancy way, we fancy people, that's how we say cheese and crackers. And rich crackers.
Do you know how I
with
say?
Salami.
Do you know how I say charcuterie?
Lunchable.
Lunchable.
I am aware of that.
I feel like we've
We've done the whole stuff.
Have we done this on the podcast?
We have on the podcast. Yes, it was on the podcast.
You fancy?
What an olive it is.
I'm gonna spew some vitriol real quick. I'm gonna do it. You fancy people with your charcuterie boards. Today, I'm gonna go home. At some point in my day, I'm gonna take one of my child's Lunchables. And you know what I'm gonna call it? I'm not gonna call it charcuterie. I'm gonna call it what we've called it for years. Lunchables.
Yeah, because Lunchables are definitely newer than charcuterie.
100%.
You know, I'm preaching on fasting. You're fasting today, aren't you? I know you're not supposed to tell people you're fasting. Are we supposed to tell people but I can tell people you're fasting.
We are. I am fasting with my home group today.
You know, it's interesting that the passage, almost the whole passage, is dealing with fasting. In fact, it's all in some way connected to fasting because where I am in Isaiah, they were fasting with the wrong motives and doing the wrong thing. So anyway, never preached a whole sermon on fasting, and I'm sure people are just going to be thrilled. You know, it's fun stuff talking about fasting.
Well, you know, there's going to be some growing pains with that one, but I will encourage people. The more you do it,
it's a deep, rich experience if you're doing it with the right motives and in the right ways.
I agree. Yeah. I'm with you.
Yeah.
And do it with people. It's fun with people.
Agreed.
You just changed your voice.
That was a movie line.
Can I tell you something that I appreciate about you when you preach?
Anytime you want to tell me something you appreciate about me, you don't have to ask permission.
This one,
just fire away.
This one, I appreciate it.
By the way, for our listeners, this may be the first time.
That's false. That is so false.
That's not true.
This is really the first time I've given you this compliment.
Oh, well.
Because I don't know if this is as big a problem nowadays.
Are we recording? I need this
recording.
Are
we? I think we're recording. Al, are we on? Are we recording?
We're going to need this for posterity.
You don't have a preaching voice. It's just you. Like Mike on the podcast, Mike in the office, Mike at the pulpit. It's the same.
I appreciate that because I actually teach my preaching students. Don't be somebody in the pulpit you're not out of the pulpit.
Man, I have seen a guy one time. I'm just kind of I'm a negative Nancy today, right now. My mom's name is Nancy, by the way. She was going to be the one who named me Rowdy. No, she's not real negative. She's Nancy though.
Okay.
She's a Nancy.
I know a lot of very pleasant Nancys.
Fancy Nancy.
Ooh, is she fancy? Does she eat
Not really. She's not fancy. She does do some Lunchables.
Okay.
I'm kind of negative. I hate that. But I have seen some guys that you're like sitting there talking with them, you know, before they get up and preach, and it's like, oh man, this guy's kind of cool. And then they get up and like, and then God said, you know, it's like, what in the world?
There was actually a guy when I was working on one of my seminary degrees. We had a guest lecturer, and he came in, and this is how long ago it was. He popped in a videotape of a sermon he preached.
Okay.
Because this was going to be the example. And this guy was like real likable and everything. And he gets in the pulpit and he starts talking like this. And every single thing he says, from the good morning to the amen, is yelling. And we're like, wait, what is happening?
Easy, big fella.
Why is he yelling at us? What did we do?
Oh, man. That's good stuff. That's good stuff.
Yeah. Well, thanks for appreciating.
Hey, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah. I've got a topic for us today. Are you ready to begin?
I'm not sure.
Well, I tell you what. Before we begin,
Yes.
we got to start. Got to start the day off right.
Well, let's do it.
Welcome to the Mic'd Up Podcast, where we have the conversations
About the conversations you are having.
Nailed it.
We've gotten pretty good at
Let me
that.
tell you something.
Yeah.
There's not many things I'm good at in life, but I feel like hitting the intro to the Mic'd Up Podcast.
And you know what? I
We're
just
there.
keep thinking, I don't know why. It's just magical thinking, I know, but I keep thinking, if we get it perfected, Pit Boss is going to hear
Pit
it.
Boss.
And they're going to say, we got to sponsor
Listen,
these guys.
Pit Boss is coming, man. I feel.
And I will let them take all the pictures they want of me with the brand new top-of-the-line Pit Boss they give me.
I would love to do that.
I mean, nothing wrong with my older Pit Boss. It's awesome. But, you know, they've come out with new gadgets.
I
since
am
I'm-
all for a new Pit Boss any day of the week and twice on Sunday.
Absolutely.
So, for us, Pit Boss, we know you're listening.
You gotta be
We
listening.
know that you're hearing us. Okay, I'm glad that we have been able to have a little bit of fun our first 3, 4, or 5 minutes here because we got a serious topic today. We're talking politics. We're talking Jesus. I want to lay out the question first, and I'm going to go ahead and give a heads up. I'm going to do, because we've actually done a podcast on this topic before.
We have.
We have.
Why are we doing it again?
Because I want to play a little devil's advocate here.
Okay.
And I don't necessarily know that we have discussed this topic through the lens of politics. So here's my question, all right? And just for those of y'all who did not, I would encourage you to listen last week so you can kind of understand what we're trying to do here over the next few episodes. We got a spicy political climate.
Spicy.
We got a spicy political climate that is heating up. We have the election. It looks like it's going to be, between Biden and Trump again. I don't know if there's any other candidates that are really starting to rise to the top or not, but
We have a two-party system.
We have a two-party system.
Love it or hate it. It's what it is.
right. So, anyways, for us, we're just trying to help people stay informed on how to think through the political landscape. And I'm kind of posing these questions to you through the form of like, hey, what do you think Jesus would do here? How would he see this? How would he potentially vote? He might not have voted at all. I don't know. And I would actually, we're not going to talk about that today, but I actually want to talk about that, what you think about that. If
That'll be a
Jesus would
short
have-
episode.
It'll be a short episode? Okay, well, then maybe we can work that in to another episode. But here's the question. Would Jesus support or vote for, either one, a candidate who actively supports abortion? Would Jesus support or vote for a candidate who actively supports abortion? I want to give a couple of caveats there. One, primarily, when I say actively supports abortion, I am sure that both on the Democratic side of the aisle and the Republican side of the aisle, I am sure that there are candidates who probably don't talk about this topic very much because they know how polarizing it is. And so we're not really necessarily talking about parties here. We're talking about candidates who have specifically come out and said, hey, I am in support of abortion. And I've got an argument here that has been thrown out to me, and I am playing devil's advocate. If y'all want to know where my stance is on everything, y'all can go back. I haven't changed my stance from where the last time we talked about abortion. But let's get started with that question. How do you think Jesus will line up, and why?
All right. Here
Come
we
on,
go.
come on.
So, my hesitancy on this is not the abortion topic. I'm very clear on
Yes.
abortion. I believe abortion on demand is it's murder.
Okay.
It's the taking of an innocent child's life is
Okay.
what it is. And so my hesitancy in this is frankly just the idea of Jesus supporting or voting for any candidate. And let me tell you why. I mean, biblically, I think there are a couple of issues here. For one thing, we read in Scripture that every leader that is in place is there because God puts them there. The kings, emperors.
And where's that, Romans 12 or something like that?
Romans 13
Romans
talks
13.
about, the need to pray for them. And, but, there's stuff in the Psalms and Proverbs about how God is just sovereign over the nations. And so, But at the same time, you go back and look at Saul, King Saul, the first king. And here's where we talk about, so I'm sorry, you guys, we're going to have to get into a bit of a theological discussion here to do this. So let me lay a little theological foundation about God's sovereignty and the will of God. Historically, when we talk about the will of God, what is God's will? We talk about there being two wills in God. This is nothing new. This has been talked about for a long time. Some people talk about God's permissive will versus his commanded will, or whatever. I like the terms that sort of, I mean, I know Jonathan Edwards used these, but a lot of people use them. God's will of command and God's will of decree. In other words, God's will of command is what he actually commands to take place. God's will of decree is what actually does take place. And the best example I can give of that is that God commands, do not murder.
Yeah.
That is his will of command. Do not murder. Does God want us to murder? No.
Right.
Jesus willed that, or God willed that Jesus be crucified. He willed that. He caused that to happen. You read Acts 2, you read Acts 4, I think it's Acts 4:23. This is what happened to Jesus was what God determined beforehand would happen. He's not just sitting by watching it, predicting it. It was his will for it to happen. So that's his command, or that's his will of decree. So his will of command is do not murder, but his will of decree is murder. So does God instigate sin? No, what God does is he takes the sinful desires of human beings and uses them for his purpose, just like he did with Nebuchadnezzar when the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem and took the Jews captive back to Babylon.
Yeah.
God referred to this pagan, evil, wicked king who in Nebuchadnezzar's mind and heart, he wanted to destroy Israel, or Judah.
Yeah.
But in God's mind, he calls Nebuchadnezzar his servant.
Yeah.
He's doing exactly what I tell him to do.
Yeah.
So he didn't put the sinful desires, he's not the author of sin, but he did cause that to happen. So what does that have to do with where we are today? Well, again, let's back up again. Sorry, let's go to King Saul, the first king. God said, when you get to the land, you're going to ask for a king.
Yeah.
You're going to want a king like all the other nations. Don't do it, but when you do it, you're going to get one and it's going to be bad. So then, Samuel is the judge that's ruling over the people and they want a king. And Samuel says to God, they're rejecting my leadership. And God said, no, they're rejecting me. Give them a king. I've already got him picked out.
Yeah.
So Saul was God's will. God selected Saul, but Saul was a terrible, disastrous, wicked king who ended up being, he ended up dying a violent death. And so the question is, would God support Saul as king? Well, God put him in place as king, but it violated his will of command. It was his will of decree. So all of this to say, what kind of support would Jesus lend to any kind of leader today? Would he vote for certain leaders today? I'm not altogether certain Jesus would vote and place his endorsement on any leader who is ultimately going to be fallen and sinful to some degree in some area. However, we know that he's ultimately responsible for putting them into place. So that's why I don't know if you can understand my hesitancy there.
I see what you're saying. Let me ask you this, just for our listeners, because obviously we're Baptists and Baptists have different theological backgrounds in understanding God's sovereignty. Mm-hmm. Would you be open to the phrase or the idea that, hey, there are people who would disagree with what you just said about different rulers and politicians and still be within? I'm trying to say it in a way that it would actually encompass just about anybody, at least in the Baptist tradition. I don't know that we would have anybody who would deny that God is ultimately responsible for the world's nations, for the leaders of the nations of the world. Now we would probably disagree, and I know we would disagree on how that all comes to be. Yeah.
But I think that even when there are wicked rulers, God is doing something for a reason. God is in charge of God never sits back and goes, oh man, I didn't want that to happen.
Yeah.
Gee whiz, what am I going to do now? No, it all fits into this plan that he has, this overarching plan for the world. I think where you get into the debate is exactly how does he flesh all that out, and I just have to plead ignorance on that, how he fleshes all that out.
Because I mean, I think just like for the sake of our listeners, you and I have different views on theology. We had, the main thing is the main thing.
Yeah, we're talking about third level, fourth level.
So it'd be kind of like one of those deals that like if you're listening and you maybe don't like it, like I think that there is, like you said, like there is room for interpretation of how we get to the place where it's like, okay, well certainly God has allowed this person in office.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so maybe we're, that's where we're going to split hairs. Did God just allow it to happen?
Right. Okay.
But even if God allowed it to happen, He allowed it to happen because it fit in with His will somehow.
Right. Yeah.
Because He's not going to allow something to happen that's going to thwart His plans. Right. So that's where and it's funny. The divide on this is not as great as a lot of people make it, and which is why I think there's been a lot of ink spilled and friendships ruined on this. Yeah. On drawing up battle lines.
Well, I mean, denominations and all sorts of
So let's get back. Let's say Jesus is alive today, and there's a candidate that says, "I believe I want to ensure a woman's right." This is what you're talking about, actively supporting.
Yes.
I want to ensure a woman's right to terminate her pregnancy up to the moment she is in labor at full term.
Okay, let's address it, because from what I can tell, it does seem like there are some in the political landscape that would make that claim. Hey, what do they call it now? Reproductive rights or something like that. Yeah. Essentially, like, hey, I want to ensure that somebody can have an abortion all the way up to the time of pregnancy, or I'm sorry, of delivery. And then there does seem to be some nuance with some politicians. I don't even know who the politicians are, to be honest with you. But I just, like, in hearing the dialogue, there does seem to be some kind of nuance where some people are like, well, I think you should be able to have an abortion up to blank space. I think you should be able to have an abortion up to blank space, and so on and so forth. So, like, let's start with the part of the question saying, like, yeah, what do you think about the person who says, hey, abortion on demand at any point in time during the pregnancy up to delivery?
Okay, and I'm just going to explain that I think if you abort for any reason at 20 weeks or 40 weeks, the evil is the same.
Yeah.
Okay, or 6 weeks. Okay, so, in my mind and my heart, you're taking an innocent life, period.
Can I play the devil's advocate just for a second?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. Again, my views have not changed on this. I'm doing this for the sake of dialogue.
Absolutely.
Something interesting has come up that actually was addressed in my ethics class in my master's program.
Okay, good.
In vitro fertilization. You essentially will take an egg, sperm, scientifically put these together to create an embryo, like this is the scientific terminology, and then freeze said embryo until there is a viable pregnancy. So typically what I think happens...
Wait, until there's a viable pregnancy.
So apparently with the embryo... Oh, you go ahead. Yeah.
No, you don't freeze it until there's a viable pregnancy. You freeze it for a future possibility of a viable pregnancy.
Right. So, like, some people, I think what they'll do is, like, they'll put like 4 or 5 embryos.
Yep.
Or they'll create 4 or 5 embryos and then see, like, okay, like, let's put one embryo in the womb. Let's see if that embryo survives. If it doesn't, okay, let's take the second one, see if that one survives, third, and so on and so forth. I think that is how some people practice it. I'm not sure that's how everybody practices it. So you have essentially conception, right? I mean, like what we would call the act of conception.
Yes.
You have it now. It's being done scientifically, not necessarily through sex, but there is conception, and then this embryo is being gone and being frozen. Do you believe that embryo has a soul if conception has actually happened?
Yes, it's a human.
So
we're talking about a fertilized egg.
Right, a
Yes.
fertilized egg.
Yes, I do.
So right now in America, I've done a little bit of research on this. The numbers are all over the place. So I'm going to throw out a number, and somebody could very easily email us or something like that and say, "Hey, you got your
It
numbers
depends
wrong."
on where you read.
It depends on where you read.
That's right.
It appears that there are at least 1 million embryos frozen in the United States right now. Would you, as a Christian, as a pastor, theologian, would you say, hey, that is 1 million people that are just being locked in a
Yes.
freezer?
Yes.
Then to me, then like the abortion whole topic and issue, I'm kind of backing out of it.
But IVF comes into play.
It does come into play, and so I'm going to stop playing devil's advocate here because this is
No, in fact,
interesting.
I'll tell you, to me, I know abortion is controversial in our country, and I don't mind speaking and denouncing it. I think I can say something that's going to be even more controversial than that, is that I think there comes a point with IVF where what we're doing is playing God. And we're trying to, and I want to be sensitive with this because there are people that want to have babies and can't have babies, and
Yes.
they're doing everything they can, and I believe medical intervention is great. I think we cross the ethical line when what we're doing is we're creating, and this is going to sound really harsh, but we're creating disposable babies.
Yes, to put in a freezer.
To put in a freezer, and let's say you got 5 of them, and the first one takes, and you got a baby. What are you doing with the other 4?
Exactly. You got to discard them or keep them in the freezer.
Tell me where either of those options is morally acceptable.
They're not.
Exactly.
They're not, and that's where this whole debate, and we're breaking from abortion just a little bit, but this whole debate is just it is being exacerbated.
Exacerbated?
Man, I really thought I was going to sound smart with that word. I failed.
Blown out of proportion.
Blown out of
How's
proportion. This whole thing is getting blown out of proportion now because we have a society where we have 1 million fertilized eggs, 1 million what I'm going to call babies.
Yeah.
We have 1 million babies that are there, and so it's distorted the abortion topic a little bit because I've actually had it brought to me those aren't people. You're not fighting for their rights.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, when is it a people? When is it a person?
Right.
Who gets to decide that?
Who gets to decide that? And so, this is typically where I land with people when it comes to that question. And this is, I don't know, this might even make you uncomfortable. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna be as raw and honest as I possibly can. I don't know exactly when a person becomes a person, and so because I don't know, I'm going to protect life at conception. That's where my view is.
Fair enough. I believe at conception a person becomes a person.
And I'm perfectly fine with that. Yeah. I'm just saying, for me, if there was the old saying, the gun to the head, hey, when does life happen? When does a person have a soul?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anything else is arbitrary.
Yeah.
It's arbitrary.
Right.
In fact, there was a time when Baptists supported abortion.
Right before Roe v. Wade.
Before Roe v. Wade. And I will tell you that I've heard some of the arguments, and the arguments went back to Genesis when God breathed life into Adam, and the argument was until it has taken a breath. Yeah. That it is.
I've heard the heartbeat argument.
Yeah,
There's all sorts of things like that. So my deal is just look, does it matter? Nobody can, no skeptic can say with certainty, hey, this is when life happens.
Right.
So therefore, okay, well, I'm going to protect it all.
That's right.
we're going to protect it all. And so now you have all these at least perceived and nuanced arguments about abortion, why aren't y'all so upset about the embryos and stuff like that? I guess I'm kind of here to say I am upset about
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, and the sad thing is the argument against that is not reproductive rights, which I wouldn't call abortion reproductive rights. The argument has gone to, you don't care about infertility. You don't care about these people, and I do.
Yeah,
I do care about that, and children are a blessing from the Lord, and they are. And most married people, not all, but most married people want to have children, and when you can't, it's heartbreaking.
Right.
But instead of crossing ethical boundaries, I would hope for the Christian couples at least to strive to find their contentment and fulfillment in the Lord. And I would also, and boy, this is, man, how did we get here? But I would also encourage them to adopt, because there are countless children who need homes. And then the pushback is, well, I don't have $25,000 to adopt. And so, we do have problems there. But I will also tell you, there are ways through foster to adoption programs that it's not. Right. There are ways, and it's heartbreaking and it's painful. But I will tell you that even couples who can have babies, there's pain there. My wife and I had at least one miscarriage that we know of. And I'll just tell you, that's hard, and it's heartbreaking to know that you lost a baby. And at the time, I'm not a doctor, I don't have these statistics, but I will tell you that our OBGYN told us at the time, he said, we know for a fact, and this was, over 30 years ago, he said, we know for a fact that at least 1 out of every 6 pregnancies ends with miscarriage.
Really?
He said,
1 out of
but
6. Wow.
we suspect it's as much as 2 out of every 3.
What?
Because they just happen so early.
You don't know.
Here we are here's the way he described it, as a woman misses her menstrual cycle or is late, and then suddenly it comes a couple weeks later, and what's happened is she's just miscarried very early. And so, but anyway, it's a lot. So, when you're saying, well, there's heartbreak sometimes because you get up to the verge of adoption and then you lose a baby. I understand, just like there are people, I know a lot of people that have, carried babies for a long time. And lost them. I know people who have had babies born and then lost them. And so, there is a risk and there is heartbreak involved sometimes with just with the whole idea of pregnancy and having babies. But we've gotten way well, okay.
Let me ask one question for clarity's sake. If we need to, Al can edit this out if we need to.
Okay.
IVF.
Yeah.
If you had a couple that come to you and say, "Hey, look, we really want to try to have," because a lot of the times what happens in IVF is you have one of the people in the marriage that is infertile.
Right. Yeah.
And so you might use the sperm of a fertile man, but the egg of of somebody else or something like that. I don't know all the details, but it's I know that it's intricate. If somebody came and said, "Hey, look, a woman was like, I want to carry this baby," so we're not going to fertilize more than one egg at a time. What would you say to that? Like if they don't have this surplus of embryos over here of as we have already said in this podcast, of babies that would potentially be
I don't know, Kobe.
I
don't know. That is a hard one, and we have to be honest that there are gray areas.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we as Christians like to pretend everything's black and white, and it's just with the knowledge that we have and the limitations we have, not everything is black and white. I will say, here I'll go getting controversial again, and let me back into it a little bit. Surrogacy, you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
You hire somebody to carry a baby. That's renting a womb and buying a baby. And I've got real problems with that ethically, that the plan is we're intentionally going to impregnate a woman knowing that that baby's never going to be able to grow up with his or her birth mother.
Yeah. And we also know that woman is going to have a chemical response to desire to raise that baby.
Yep. My daughter is carrying a child right now.
Yeah.
It's her first, and she is in love. She is in love with that little nugget growing inside of her, and it's real. It's not just some emotional hype. It is a love that she has. And I'll tell you this, my son-in-law is in love with that baby. And I'll tell you this, I am in love with that baby.
Yeah.
That is inside my daughter, because that is my grandchild in there. And there is something, but yes, even chemically there's something happened though, that with the mother carrying that baby. And when you just hire somebody to give a baby, and then the plan is we're going to do this with the intention of stripping this child from his or her mother. That's
Yeah.
an ethical problem. That is different than just an outright adoption, that, there was a rape or an incest or, who knows what other kind of life things. Oh man, we got pregnant and we can't afford a baby, or this is a single parent and the father has bailed and she doesn't feel like she can't. Then wonderful, let's have somebody raise that baby. But to intentionally go into that. So I'm backing into this to say, what are we doing when we say, hey, we can't have babies because the husband can't produce sperm, so we're going to go buy sperm. And some stranger over there is going to have his child running around.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know. And boy, let me tell you too, there's some real issues that we have seen pop up that come from like these sperm banks and stuff like that, where years later, now you're going to have siblings trying to get married because some guy out there is the father of 50 kids because he sold his sperm to a sperm bank.
There's some ethical
there's
things
just
there.
a can of worms there.
Yeah.
And I understand we didn't have the science and technology in Scripture, and yet I don't think we need to discard modern medicine because cancers are being cured and all kinds of things, and it's wonderful. And I think there's fertility treatments that are wonderful, but when we start involving other people in the process, when we know they're not actually going to be raising their kids, I think we run into some ethical problems there.
Yeah.
And there's probably going to be some not liking that, and I would love to hear from you. I'm not declaring any kind of infallibility on this. I'm just telling you there's some ethical concerns there that I have a problem with.
I think that like that's the. If, for any listener that's out there who hasn't liked the route this conversation has gone so far, yeah, it is easy for me. I have 3 daughters. Like, it's easy for me to talk about, like, hey, if you're not able to have a baby, like, go adopt, consider adoption or something along those lines. I haven't had to, like, wrestle with those. Yes, it's easy for me to talk about. However, I do think everything that you've said, you have derived it from principles that we see in Scripture. And so while it may be easy for us to say, it's not something that is derived from us.
Right.
Like, we're not just over here just
I'm
spouting
open
off.
to being corrected.
Yeah, totally.
Now, can we get back to what
Let's
would
get
Jesus
to
support
yeah.
here?
So let's get to yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna lay this down and just say, one of the reasons as a pastor, there are multiple reasons as a pastor that I don't endorse candidates.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, well, it's illegal for you. It's actually not illegal for me to do. In my private life, I can do whatever I want to, and I'm protected by law. In fact, in the church, a church can legally endorse a political candidate. Now, we risk losing our tax-exempt status because then we become a political entity instead of a religious organization.
Right. Yeah.
But there's nothing illegal about us doing that. I don't think we should do it, and I won't do it publicly, and I don't tell people who I vote for a couple reasons. One is I don't want to use any influence that I have as a pastor to influence the way people vote because I think they need to vote their conscience.
Yeah.
But another reason is I don't want to go out there endorsing some candidate, because when I endorse publicly a candidate, I am saying I endorse every position this guy takes. And frankly, I'm not sure I've ever met a candidate that I could say that about.
Right. Yeah.
I may have, I don't know, but I'm also, putting my stamp of approval, so to speak, and I will say because of my position, by default, I'm putting Central Baptist Church's stamp of approval. Even if I'm doing it just as a private citizen, I've got a yard sign, let's say, supporting a candidate.
Yeah.
I am tied to Central Baptist Church, and people in the community are going to go, oh, Central Baptist Church supports this guy, even though he takes this unbiblical position on something, or this morally reprehensible position on something. And that's why I'm not sure Jesus would vote, because then Jesus would be seen as endorsing everything about a candidate.
Yeah.
So you said we might talk about this in a future episode, but we'll go ahead and talk about it now, that would Jesus vote for or endorse or support a candidate who supports abortion? I'm not even, No.
Well, let me ask you a question. I know your stance on abortion. Do you feel like, and I mean, I'm not necessarily asking you to speak for you, but do you feel like abortion is a big enough issue that you would say, okay, like if this person takes a stance of affirming abortion, that like they're off the table? Do you feel like that's too far? Do you feel like there's middle ground?
I can tell you
there?
that somebody that is actively supporting and working for abortion on demand, the right to abortion on demand, I'll just tell you, I will not vote for that.
Yeah.
I will not. Now, that's not the only issue I won't vote for.
Yeah.
But I will not vote for a candidate. But I'm going to tell you a couple of reasons. One is I don't want those policies because I do believe that is one of the greatest evils of our days. It is a modern day Holocaust.
Yeah. How many babies have been killed since Roe v. Wade? It's like over 60 million, I think. It's
yes.
so crazy.
It's staggering.
Yeah.
And so I won't do that because I don't want those policies, and I want that eradicated. I want it gone. I want it punished when it happens. But another reason is, and here, man, I'm really going to offend people today. I believe that, and let's just go to the presidential level. If you're running for president and you believe that it is morally acceptable to take the innocent life of a child, you do not have the moral fortitude, the moral, what's the better word I'm looking for? Fortitude's not a good word. You don't have the kind of moral compass you need to lead our nation.
Yeah.
You are morally corrupt to an extent, and we're all corrupt, we're all fallen into sin, but you're corrupt to a point I don't trust you to make sound, reasonable decisions.
Yeah. You know, because I've seen a number of times, like just in my life, and that and then just a ton of presidents, but there's been Christians essentially with every election that gets very excited about voting for a candidate that supports abortion, that actively supports abortion.
Yeah.
I will say, from my perspective, it's something that I cannot understand.
Right.
I don't get it. I don't understand it. I have had people bring arguments to me. There was one young man that brought an argument to me. He was an immigrant. Mm-hmm. He said, look, you take this strong stance on abortion. He said, but this person, yes, they affirm abortion, but they help people like me have a better life. Like their views on immigration are a lot better. And this is what I'm going to tell you what I told him. Mm-hmm. Without telling who the guy was or anything like that, I'm going to tell you what I told him, and you tell me if you think I was foolish or not.
Okay.
Essentially what I told him, I said, look, I am happy that you made it to the United States from the country that you were in. You came from a bad situation and all that stuff. But even if you wouldn't have made it to the United States, you still would have had your life.
Right.
When we're talking about abortion, we're talking about taking the life from somebody.
That's right. We're talking about actively killing a child.
Actively killing a child. The most offensive person.
In a brutal, cruel, tortuous, painful way.
Yeah.
Even if it weren't painful, it wouldn't be right. But
Right.
I mean, it is barbaric,
Yeah.
the practice of abortion.
Yeah, and science has shown us that. I mean, like, that's undeniable
That's a
at this point in
slam
time.
dunk.
I mean, we know this.
In fact, it was Bill Maher. Bill Maher's an interesting character.
He's gotten even more interesting in the last 2 or 3 years.
And he was talking about abortion. He said, let's call it what it is. It is killing a child. And then he goes, and I'm okay with that.
There's some interesting, yeah.
Okay, but I mean, let's just be honest about what it is. And so, I know it's a complex issue. I understand unplanned pregnancies. I understand, rape, incest, but I don't think you give the death penalty to the baby.
Right.
In those cases.
So I pulled this up. This is from Mother Teresa. So this is a quote from her on abortion. This is interesting. This was in February 1997, National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, attended by the President and First Lady. It says, "What is taking place in America," she said, "is a war against the child." So I'm not sure if this was her or somebody quoting her. "What is taking place in America is a war against the child." Mm-hmm. And if we accept that the mother can kill her own child, how can we tell other people not to kill one another?
Agreed.
I mean, like, there's an ethical dilemma there.
Agreed.
And that's where, like, I go back to what you're saying about the moral compass of a presidential candidate or of any candidate in any office, that if we're going to come out and say, hey, and by the way, I am not making a stance here about Democrats versus Republicans. There are Republicans who support abortion.
Absolutely.
But if you're going to come out and make that claim, like, oh, yeah, this is okay, I'm sorry, I cannot trust that you're going to have any ability to say what is good or evil or anything like that.
That's right. It's just like somebody said, and this was back when we had a president who, while in office, committed adultery. In fact, I would even say it ran into what we would classify as sexual assault because it was a subordinate. Somebody said, if you'll lie to your wife, you'll lie to the American public. And, how can you trust a guy like that? And well, nobody's perfect. No, nobody's perfect, but there is a high standard. Doggone, there's a high standard of morality and character for somebody that's going to hold a position of leadership, especially the most powerful person in the world. We got to have somebody we can trust who has nuclear codes.
Yeah.
And so, I do get upset about that. But let me tell you something else, too, that I think it's a terrible argument that's used when I say, like, well, I can't vote for somebody who advocates for abortion on demand. Oh, but you don't mind voting for this. No, I didn't say I was going to vote for that either. Like, well, you got to vote for one. Well, maybe not. But just because I reject one candidate doesn't mean I don't also reject the other.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about that is there are tiers to this thing. Not TEARS, but TIERS, right?
Levels.
There's levels. There's levels to this thing, to where we have got to be able, in our politics, say, no, these are the most important things for me. I'm not going to budge on this.
Right. I agree.
These are the negotiables. I'm gonna. There's wiggle room here.
Just like we do with theology.
Just like we do with theology. There's tiers to nearly everything we do in life, and we got to be able to look at something and say, no, this is that important.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean,
what are you going to do if suddenly we have two presidential candidates? Let's just take this issue, and they both support abortion on demand at all stages of pregnancy. What are you going to do?
You want me to tell you what I would do?
No. but really, this, well, you got to pick the lesser of two evils. Okay, well, now you've got that issue.
Yeah.
So are you, Mike, am I now going to end up voting for one? Well, no, I reject that. Oh, so you just wouldn't vote? Yeah, well, you have to vote. No, I don't.
That's right.
I can write in a candidate. Well, that's a losing ballot. Yep.
But you're voting for your conscience.
I'm
That's
going
right.
with my conscience, not somebody else's.
And I even told somebody this, and maybe this just shows my lack of political understanding. But if all of a sudden, if only Christians in America were to take a stand and say, hey, look, I'm going to quit voting for the lesser of two evils, and I'm going to vote my conscience, somebody eventually is going to look and realize, oh my gosh, there are so many people who are not voting for the two primary candidates.
Right.
How do we reach those people?
Right.
And then we can say, stop being crazy.
Yeah.
Stop giving us the lesser of two evils over here. And
if we could just stop being crazy, it would solve so many.
I wish I could stop being crazy sometimes. It's hard. If Pit Boss would sponsor us, I think I'd be a lot better. It'd be a lot better.
Yeah.
So let's kind of end on this note here.
We need to wrap it up.
I know you, and I appreciate this about you, because every time I hear you, well, I'd say this, nearly every time I hear you, and I think that you've said it enough that now people understand kind of where you stand. When you bring up abortion, when you say that you're pro-life, you're not just saying that you're anti-abortion. That's
exactly right.
You're saying, like, hey, from womb to the tomb,
By the way, when I say
I'm
pro-life, I believe that our immigration policy needs to be a pro-life immigration policy.
Exactly. So we can say, hey, this issue of abortion is so important to us because we are pro-life people, womb to tomb. But we do have to acknowledge that what is happening here is killing on a scale that is far significant than any other pro-life issue that we got.
Well, and let's look at the immigration issue. By the way, the immigration issue is a very important issue to me because not controlling our border is not pro-life. Why? Because you can let murderers in, you can let terrorists in. You've got these coyotes, you've got all this human trafficking going on, you've got all this drug trafficking going on. None of that is pro-life. Trafficking, these coyotes that are charging these poor people thousands of dollars to get across the border and then they're abusing them along the way, that is not pro-life. We've got to secure the border.
Yeah.
That's pro-life. By the same token, locking the border down, kicking people out of the country who've been here for 40 years and they were brought here as a 3-month-old. They've lived here 40 years. They don't even speak another language, and kicking them out of the country is not pro-life.
Right.
Saying, no, we're going to close our border and we're only going to let, we're not going to let people in at all. Or what we're going to do is what we have now, we're going to have this process where people have to live in these immigrant camps, refugee camps for years and years and years in terrible conditions because we don't have enough immigration judges and we've got this system that's broken. It's not pro-life. It is not valuing human life. We're not valuing the immigrant in a truly pro-life position. You're asking what the solution is. I don't know, but the solution has got to be secure the border and streamline an immigration process.
Right. Yeah.
That is good for everybody.
Right.
And I know I'm making it sound like a simple issue. It is so complex because it's so out of control.
Yeah.
But to me, that's a pro-life issue. I look at environmental policies as a pro-life issue. When you're saying, hey, we're going to shut down, we're going to stop the oil. Well, how many people are we going to damage by doing that? How many people are we going to put out of work, and what are going to be the long-term consequences? Are going to be detrimental to human life.
Yeah.
Well, that's pro-life. Do we need to care for the environment? Do we need to clean it up and curtail pollution? Absolutely, that's pro-life because we're taking away things that are carcinogens.
It goes on.
Everything.
Veterans affairs. All
I
this
believe
sort of
everything has to be filtered through that, and you don't have to be a Christian to be pro-life.
Mm-hmm. I agree 100%.
I think you need to have a solid moral compass that's really thinking, and we've got to get away from just, well, I'm a Republican, therefore I'm going to support whatever the Republican Party says, or I'm a Democrat, therefore I'm going to support whatever the Democratic Party says, and we got to get away from these slogans. I mean, you look at these, and I don't mind saying, you look at the insanity that's going on in some of these college campuses with these students protesting in favor of Hamas. Have they really thought through this? No, they're getting caught up in a moment. For one thing, I'm going to protest on a college campus, and I'm not going to eat for 3 days, and then I'm going to hand off my fast to somebody else because I got to go eat, and I'm going to demand that the university bring food in and medical care in and take care of us, and somehow that's going to stop the war.
Well, I mean,
you've got this because they're
people aren't
not
thinking. Yeah.
And
Hamas is a terrorist organization that has actively persecuted the LGBT community, and right now there's like a
Gays
group called
for Hamas.
It's like, dude, do y'all not realize you would be killed by these people? You would be, and not just killed, but killed brutally.
So you're for that? Why don't you go move there
and see what happens?
And by the way, I'm not advocating.
Right, yeah. We're not. It's not the threat.
Why aren't you going to do that? Because they just kill you.
Yeah.
And this is who you're for.
Right.
And it's just
that's what I bring. We brought up the IVF thing earlier. I don't know that people have thought through this kind of stuff well. And my biggest fear, the reason I've posed the question about, hey, and I'm probably asking, well, what would Jesus have done in this is probably, but it's like, hey, what is wisdom here? Is it acceptable for a candidate to actively support abortion? I think that's probably the better question that we should have opened with. But I don't know that. My fear is I don't think Christians have thought through this. Like, if this is a person who is taking this as their stance on one of their top 3 or top 4 issues that they're going to put out there for the public, that they're going to run on one of their
it's one of their platforms.
Platforms, yeah. We are supporting somebody who does not value human life.
Right.
And I will say this, and I know this is controversial, but I've already said it once, so I'll go ahead and double down on it. I do think that with all the problems going on in immigration, and they are vast, and I hope that we can fix them. I don't think that either party is offering good solutions right now, personally, but that's neither here nor there.
I would agree with that.
the idea that babies are being killed in the womb trumps all other pro-life issues, in my opinion, because we're ripping life from people. Like we're not even giving them an option.
That's exactly right.
And I'm afraid that Christians haven't thought through that. So, anyways, that's the
And that's
conversation.
something I appreciate about you is that you wrestle with this stuff, and I think that's one of the things that's so helpful. And you're dealing, in your particular ministry is the minister of or the associate pastor of family discipleship. Is that your title?
Something like
that. You're dealing with a lot of young families, so you're dealing with a lot of the Gen X and Gen Z crowd, and they're the ones that are. Honestly, they're the ones that a lot of times are more sensitive to some of the what we might call more progressive, or they're more open to some of the more progressive views. You're also behind the pine curtain in Deep East Texas, which means you've got a lot of the more very conservative views. And so you're having to help people think through these instead of just going with a party or just going, well, this statement, I'm against abortion, but I don't want to tell other people what to do. I'm against murder, but I don't want to tell you not to murder.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
How can I say that? And it's because you're helping them really try to process these things and come to some biblical conclusions, and realize also that not everything is black and white, but let's try to be as biblical as we can, and fall where the Bible says, and then not be ashamed of it.
Yeah.
It's like we're embarrassed. I'm against abortion.
We got to be able to stand on truth in love.
That's right.
We have to be able to do that.
That's right. And so as we end, I just have to say one more thing. Yeah. If you've had an abortion, we've been using very stark terms.
That's right.
But I believe you already know what's happened. And I believe you're grieving over it. And you need to know, I'm not going to make light of what happened at that abortion clinic. You need to know that I consider you, if you're a woman who's had an abortion, you're also a victim of an abortion clinic.
Yeah.
And regardless of whether you have championed abortion before or whatever, there is grace, hope, healing, and forgiveness in Jesus. Right. And we have numerous people in our church and numerous women in our church who've gone down that road and who have found freedom and healing and grace and forgiveness. And you should be welcome wherever a local church is. You should be welcome. You should find the gospel. You should find Jesus. You should find that healing, because it is not the unpardonable sin.
No, it's not.
As grievous as it is. Yeah. And so
we have been given grace.
Yes, we
in
have.
Lots of areas of our life.
So just because we speak in these terms about abortion, don't think we don't have compassion on you, because I do believe that you have been a victim. You've been victimized as well by this profit-making abortion machine and marketing mechanism that is out there that had convinced you that was the right thing for you to do. Right. And you knew probably it wasn't. You had reservations, and you know now it wasn't. And we want to help you find healing, not condemnation.
That's right. That's right.
That's all I have to say about that.
I love it.
Man, we were all over the
We were.
Today.
But to summarize it all, abortion is a big deal when it comes to how we vote. Or it should be a big deal to how we, according to how we vote.
Yeah, I tell people I'm not necessarily a single issue voter, but I'm as close to single issue.
With this
that's the biggest issue for me. It's not so you're going to no. I'm not telling you. It's the biggest issue. It's not the only issue.
There's tears. There's tears too. Everybody's got their tears. It's okay.
T-I-E-R-S.
T-I-E-R-S. The levels. The levels.
That's right.
All right, folks. Well, let's end on a positive note. I got an email I want to read for you.
Read the email and we'll be out.
Really quickly, because it's kind of been heavy today. This is from a guy. I'm going to give our shout out. Oh my gosh, I lost his name. Okay, well, what I'm looking at right now, I don't have your name saved. I apologize. It says, Kobe, rude. I am emailing you on a very serious matter. People of this country need direction, substance, humor, distraction, and honest review of the world around us outside of God's Word. One of the best sources of some great content I have found is called the Mic'd Up Podcast.
Hey.
That's a
lovely.
That's
thing
really
to say.
affirming. The email goes on and things, but it was done in good faith and good humor. And anyways, we appreciate the feedback that we get. We understand that you might have some strong disagreements with us on this particular podcast, and know that we are open to criticism. We're open to correction. We're also open to conversation.
And we believe you can have strong disagreement without hating each other, or even disliking each other, and still be friends. You and I have had strong disagreements about things.
You call it charcuterie, I call it Lunchable. Strong disagreement.
I'm fancy. It's just, what am I going to do? I'm just a fancy person.
I'm East Texas. It's Lunchable.
We better quit. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.